can't see. Let me check my list. No one's together today because that would save the trick. Oh, no,
I
wait.
think it's M. Oh, no, never mind.
No, I just saw the numbers went up now. Cool, we're all 15. All right. How are you guys doing? For those who just joined, see some tired eyes, some smiles, so that's good. Wonderful. Cool. So I wanted to just start off with saying that from last week to this week, I hope you guys are starting to see all the little puzzle pieces starting to fit together. So I watched your chat that you guys did with Laura yesterday with the pose analysis, and you see how the anatomy work that you did, the homework, kind of fits into that. Did you guys see that? Some of you mentioned in your emails you wanted a bit more repetition, so there the repetition was in. And also today, well, Laura mentioned yesterday, but today we'll see, once you have your pose analysis, your sequencing builds off of that. All right, so we're not looking, although your assignments are somewhat in isolation, there is a very strong link between this. So we're slowly starting to see how the puzzle pieces come together. Okay. I've kind of broken this chat up into the first 30 minutes or so. I want to recap some of the anatomy, go over some things that came up in the homework, maybe clarify some confusion things, which is totally fine. Some of you said to me, I'm making silly mistakes, I'm so confused. That's totally normal. Just give yourself time to let it sink in. It'll come up, it'll come up, it'll come up all the time, and eventually it'll all click together. So this is the time to just iron out any uncertainties you had about the first homework section. And you guys are going to have another little homework which is going to build on it a bit, and you are going to submit that next week Friday. And then after that, I want to get into peak post sequencing, because the next time I only see you for peak post sequencing chat is in 2 weeks time, which is like 4 days before your template or your summary is due. So hopefully we can navigate that all today. All right, are we feeling prepared? You guys have sequencing and poses on the brain, right? It's fresh in the memory, so that's cool. Okay. First things first, I was watching our chat from last week, and there was something that I picked up that I feel I wasn't quite clear on. So I wanted to take a moment here to clarify. So when we were speaking about being stronger eccentrically, I don't know if you guys remember this came up. I wanted to clarify that you are definitely stronger eccentrically. All right. The point I was making there was, for example, you might get someone like a cyclist or a runner who uses their muscles more in a concentric way. So they might not be used to it, but overall, we're stronger eccentrically. We get that. Okay. These are tricky concepts, and I saw sometimes in our homework, especially with the concentric and eccentric, there's a lot of different components to it, meaning in the sense that the definitions, or when you guys had to explain it, there were lots of different things that you guys were drawing on. So for some of you, you would have seen that I sent you a definition which was pretty much what you would have said, but in a different way, maybe using different wording, that I think is going to help you guys make the concepts a lot easier. So I want to go over those with all of you guys now. So this is kind of a definition that I took from Catherine's videos. I know it's some of them, like the book, and they're different in different places, but obviously the concepts are the same. So the important thing to remember is that our eccentric and our concentric contractions are moving contractions, all right? We know that. When we're not moving, what are we doing? Then the contraction is?
Isotonic.
Isometric. Yeah, I saw Donnie's mouth moving there. Zoom has made me really good at lip reading. So if it's not, there's no movement, i.e. holding still, we know it's isometric, okay? So we know that when we're doing concentric and eccentric, it's moving, okay? So think of that as step one. Let's go to eccentric, because that's kind of the one that we've been focusing on a lot lately. So eccentric is a moving contraction towards long range in the muscle. Okay, it's nice using the word long range because we know muscles work at short range and long range. So it's keeping our terminology or our different definitions and wording kind of consistent. So moving towards long range. okay? And a nice way to think about that is it's moving down, okay? Move downwards. I'm moving with gravity because gravity wants to push me down, but my body is resisting it, all right? So if we think in the one example you had there was moving into Uttanasana, our hamstrings are moving towards what range? In Uttanasana, or moving towards Uttanasana?
Long range.
Long range, right? So we're moving towards long range. We're moving downwards. Our hamstrings are working hard so that we don't fall on our face, all right? So we're moving eccentrically, all right? Does that make sense? Moving down. So towards long range, down, those are kind of the same words that come up. The same when we do something like chaturanga, all right? When I'm lowering in chaturanga, all right, I'm moving down. My triceps, if they weren't working, I would fall flat on my face, all right? So they are also moving towards long range. So both moving into chaturanga and moving into uttanasana, working eccentrically. Obviously, one of the triceps, one of the hamstrings. Does that make sense? You guys got that? Most of you, if you didn't get it the first time and I asked the question the second time, most of you got it. But I just wanted to highlight that wording because I think that kind of helps it make a bit more sense. Down. Cool. Got you. All right. The other thing I picked up, and I know it's because we've suddenly thrown you like a million different terminologies, and then sometimes they get a little bit muddled up, which is completely understandable. So I want to look at muscle contractions is a separate thing to joint movements, is a separate thing to pose categories. All right. So what we spoke about now, muscle contractions are isometric, concentric, wait, what did I just say? Isometric, concentric, eccentric. Okay. Our muscles move, or in isometric hold still, but those are with regards to muscle contractions. So when we're speaking about muscles, that's what we're referring to. Okay, gotcha. When we're thinking about joint movements, that's like our flexion, extension, shoulder, abduction, hip rotation, all of those kind of things are happening around a joint. Okay, so think of it that link it to the essentially the joint that we're working with. Okay, so if we're asking about what joint movements, we're talking about flexion, abduction, whatever, which is what you guys have done a little bit now with pose analysis, which is going to feed into the sequencing. Okay, the pose category on the other hand is what category that pose fits into. So those are things like back bend, forward fold, inversion, hip openers or external rotation. What was the other one? Twists. All right. So I know they're all kind of a lot of different categories, but think of them kind of in isolation. So sometimes when we were asking for pose categories, then someone would say like hip flexion or eccentric contraction. Try to demarcate those into their own little boxes. Okay. Yes, Zama.
Just a question. So just to clarify, so external rotation that falls under pose category, not joint movement.
So, okay, so in that case, it falls under both. Okay, exclusion to the rule. But so external rotation is a joint movement, but my hips can move in external rotation, so can my shoulders, but we don't really do that one a lot. But you do get external rotation as a category, which would be something like mermaid, pigeon, flying pigeon, your triangle, whatever the case may be. So it's that's kind of the only one where it could be both, but I think that it then relates to which specific joint you are working towards or talking about. Does that make sense? In that case, I think it could kind of be both, but also remember with your hip external rotation as a category, generally it's linked to something else. So let's think about mermaid. The front leg is in external rotation, right? But what other category could that pose be in?
Back bends.
Back bend.
Back bend, right? Let's think of Eka Pada Galavasana, which is your flying pigeon pose. It's a hip opener, but what is it also?
Balancing.
Arm balance.
An arm balance, yeah, or balancing pose. So external rotation is often linked with something else. Even in something as a triangle where your front leg is in external rotation, it's also just a standing pose. All right. So generally, I mean, we know some poses can fall in more than one category. All right. You can even, when you do your pose analysis, say it's an arm balance and a hip opener, because you will need to work on both, right? Okay. Does that answer your question, Zama? Cool. Any other questions at this point before we go into those joint movements a bit further? No. Okay, cool. So just 2, 3 other joint movements where I see that most of you got it right, but maybe there was a little bit of confusion around it. And hopefully now, after your back bend class yesterday, we feel like this is a little bit fresher in the brain. And what's really great about the way that I like that you did the homework and then you came back and did the practices is hopefully you started to notice things a little bit more, right? Each time you come back to the classes, you're like, ah, okay, cool, and that, and suddenly we're kind of creating this whole view of what will become our yoga teaching and our yoga sequencing. So the first one being the quad stretching. In which category do we mostly work on quad stretching?
Back bends.
Back bending, cool. Do we all understand that, right? Can we think of a couple of poses where we really get those quads to stretch? Mermaid, I saw there. Carmel, I think you were saying wheel. Wheel pose, yes. Can we think of a few more? Let's just keep them going, get that out so that we see how it translates in different poses.
With that one-legged pigeon where you're holding the foot there.
King pigeon, mermaid, yeah, because you bring that back leg in, definitely. Similar to dance's pose as well, because we're grabbing that back leg. Those are all back bends. Okay, we do also get a little bit of quad stretching in our lunges, even though that back knee is not bent. You guys would have felt it. I think I watched one of Laura's videos where was it Zani, you were doing the lunge and you were feeling the quad stretch. All right, so just think back to that as well. All right, the next one is going to look at the terms extension versus abduction. We're going to explore it both in the shoulder and in the hip. All right, so just standing where you are, I just want you guys to show me a movement of shoulder flexion. So let's just move one or both shoulders into flexion. Cool, cool, cool. Great, awesome. All right, shoulder flexion. You guys are pretty good with your poses in this one. Downward dog, handstand, child's pose, so on and so forth. All right, now bringing your shoulders into abduction. Okay, so abduction is a movement all the way up, but in yoga we mostly see abduction here. Okay, all right, so arms out here to the side, extended out. I want you to think of a pose where we have our shoulders in abduction.
Warrior two.
Warrior two, sure thing. Okay, let's say I'm just standing like this and I had to go onto my side, just kind of tip over and I had my hand on the floor. Triangle, yeah. I was thinking more like completely tips. So I'm sitting on a cushion.
What about side plank?
Yeah.
Side plank.
See, in side plank, what we're doing is we've still got our arms out to the side like this. All right. So I wanted to show you that my arms on the side, I'm tipping this way, I'm tipping this way. Even if I was in a side plank, my arm is mostly out to the side here. All right. If I bring my shoulders into extension, you guys saw, back behind you. Most of you guys got this the second time around. It's a tricky one. Most of the places where we see our extension is also in back bends. We're reaching back to get our leg in dancer or mermaid. Some of you guys said camel pose, which is really nice. You've got to reach back to try and get your hands to your heels. Things like interlacing hands behind your back into Shalabhasana, or, you know, then you look at something like humble warrior where you've got that extension into the shoulders, but you're actually folding forward. Okay, so that's a little bit of a tricky one. You guys had some clever shoulder extensions. What was another one you guys said? humble, bringing the hands behind the back to bring the palms together, whatever the case may be. All right, so we see back, forward, abduction. All right, does that all make sense? Do we have any questions about those? Okay, cool. Abduction out to the side, for example, if I was doing warrior 2 and I was weaving that into my sequencing, because this is pretty much an easy movement that a lot of people can do. I don't necessarily have to warm up the arms to be here. Of course, like warrior 2 won't be necessarily like a peak pose that I'm working to. It's more of the ones we can use in the sequence. But this is a pretty easy range for people. What do you think in the shoulder is one of the trickier parts to warm up to if we were working on peak poses? Right? Flexion and probably extension. All right, so it's actually 2 of them. We do a lot of shoulder flexion when we're doing things like our inversions, when we are, especially like wheel, handstand, that's that movement, and back behind us if we're doing something like back bends. Okay. So moving on to the hip, all right, we slowly got this one as well. Extension, same thing. Leg goes back behind us. Okay, what's working really hard to pull my leg back behind me? What muscle is working quite hard?
Glute.
Yeah, great. You guys would have felt that. Cool. So you've seen in your classes, like your bum muscles are working super hard to pull that leg back into extension. Okay, so leg is back behind you. I'm going to show you guys an example. Let me come into, I'm going to start off in a Prasarita. All right. I've got to create space here. So excuse all my fiance's fishing equipment in the background. All right, so let's do, if I'm in a Prasarita, the position of my hips is right now.
Abduction.
Abduction, cool. Let's say I'm going to move into triangle, warrior, whatever the case may be. I'm going to turn my left toes forward. What have I done to this hip?
External rotation.
External rotation.
Cool. What's happened with this hip?
Internal rotation.
Have I changed it?
No.
I haven't changed anything with this back leg. All right. If there's turning it, I would really have to, not really. So let's go from the beginning. Abducted, this leg, external rotation, and then bend the knee. All right. So my front leg here is an external rotation, little bit of hip flexion. This back leg is just kind of out in abduction. All right, because my toes are facing you. Warrior 2, triangle. These kind of poses usually fall into the external rotation because we're focusing on the front leg. Okay. Focus on my back right hip. What about when I'm doing it here in a high lunge? What was my back leg in?
Extension.
Extension. Okay. So have you noticed my back leg is in a different position when I'm facing the side of my mat or facing the front of my mat? All right. We get a lot of poses that run forward and back on our mat. So we think low lunge, half splits, high lunge, pyramid, warrior 3, standing splits. I'm always facing front back. You guys spoke about this with Laura, scissors kind of action, one leg forward, one leg back. Cool, we kind of got that. And coming back to the side, here I've got abduction, got a little bit of external rotation for things like my warrior 2, reverse, extended side angle, triangle, half moon, so on, so forth. All right. So you see we've got a lot of poses that will face this side of the mat that have similar joint movements, especially in the hips, and facing the front of the mat have similar joint movements. Do you guys get that, right? That kind of makes sense. You would have felt that in the classes. All right. So what I wanted to show you there was, for example, when we are using poses as a peak pose that are facing the side of the mat, that's already giving you a clue for poses that are also facing the side of the mat. All right. Facing the front of the mat, a lot forward and back. facing the front of the mat. Make sense? So I'm just reading the chat. I'm so sorry, Demi, are you okay? Are you fine to stay on the meeting? Are you sure? If you need to take a moment, you can just turn off your video, take a moment, come back, I'll record it. So just do what feels best for you, okay? Cool. All right. Same goes for any of you guys. If there's ever something that happens where you feel as though something's going on, just let us know. Take a moment, turn your video off. You know it's being recorded. Just do what feels best for you guys. Okay, cool. So let's quickly go back to our, what was I in? Okay, let me go back into my triangle pose. All right. So triangle pose, we said the front leg is in. I know it's a lot of repetition, but I'm just doing it over and over. Front leg is in.
External
rotation.
Okay, my back leg.
stays the same.
Yeah, it's kind of like slightly abducted.
Neutral.
No, I mean a little bit of abduction, but it's kind of like it's an accessible range that most people can do. So you can just say just as it is, okay? If I come into, let's say here's my shape, here's my triangle, all right? I'm gonna tip my triangle onto my side. I'm gonna make it into a half moon, all right? What's happening in my standing leg? Has it changed?
Extension.
Extension.
No.
Or
Flexion.
there's flexion in this hip. It's still a little bit externally rotated, right? This top leg, what am I doing here? What do you guys think this top leg is in?
External rotation too now?
If it was externally rotated, I would need to point my toes up to the ceiling and I can't really get it there. It's coming side.
Abduction.
Abduction, right. So what I want to show you is that even though I had a triangle, I tipped it on my side. The joint movements aren't changing, right? I'm changing my position. You guys see that? So the joint movements are relative to my body, not how I'm facing in gravity, all right? It's the same reason why this is shoulder flexion, whether I'm doing it like this, or whether I'm in a downward facing dog, or whether I'm in a handstand. Still flexion. We got that. So one of the things that I find kind of helps to relate it back, if I'm confused about a pose and what joint movement it is, I will maybe put it or look at it in a different way. All right. Downward facing dog, flip it over so you're sitting on your sitting bones is Navasana. Well, boat pose with your arms in line with your ears, right? So a lot of the yoga poses are seen in different directions. Okay. If you're ever uncertain, try doing it on your back, try do it on your side, move it. It's so nice when you've got them printed out because you can just like turn them like this and you don't have to do it in your body. But have a look at shapes that look the same and are in different orientation. That's going to help you understand the joint movements. Chances are they have the same joint movements, and you're going to weave it into your sequences. Okay. Any questions at this point regarding the anatomy side of things? Does anyone have a little bit of confusion around a specific joint movement that we can go over and give a couple of examples for? It's kind of the last time to chat about it before you guys dive into your sequences. Of course, I'm not running away. You can WhatsApp me anytime, but this might be the last moment to just explore that a bit. Okay, all good and happy. So let's take what we know and let's link it to, let's quickly go and just touch over the pose analysis, which you guys did with Laura yesterday. So you know that what your future assignments will look like is you're going to choose 3 poses that you are going to analyze, All right, that's where you go through all of those different processes of saying what flexibility is required, what skill, what strength, what category, all of those details. You're going to rate it. You're going to kind of go through all that motion for 3 of them. You're then going to pick one of them. You're going to send me the name of that pose, and that is going to be the pose that you are going to sequence for. So I know Laura spoke to you guys about choosing a pose that you guys want to work on, because this is the time where you get to refine it. And then also when you leave here, you've already got an awesome sequence that you can rely on, and you know how to make it easier or harder so that you can progress towards that pose. So that's what you guys are going to do with sequencing. So there is a very big overlap between pose analysis and your sequencing, all right? Because we can't sequence unless we know where we're going. So that pose analysis is actually so great that you guys are doing 3 of them, because it means when you leave here, you've still got another 2 analyzed that you can make sequences for. Okay, so let's quickly go. Do you guys have your manuals with you? All right, let's quickly go to page 197. Cool. And then what I think
Is that 196?
196 is the start, but we're actually going to only look from 197.
Okay.
Makes sense. Just give me a moment. Okay. All right. So just to quickly jump back a step, bear with me here. Just glancing at your anatomy work 2. This is kind of a combination of what you have already learned and a little bit of what you guys are starting to understand about poses, okay? So anatomy 2 is obviously separate from all the other assignments that's due on Friday. You guys all submitted it in the right way. Everything was sorted about that. Doesn't look as though there's anything that may be confusing. I assume you guys maybe haven't looked at it because that's next week's problem, right? Cool. If any major questions come up, just pop that on the group, but I think you guys will have the general gist of it. Okay, so when it comes to our sequencing work, step 1 is to obviously go through your pose analysis for that pose. So the work that you're going to do for Laura is going to help us step 1. So chances are you're going to do that first because that makes it a little bit easier. From there, you're going to take that pose analysis and we're going to build onto it a bit, okay? Some of the whole first section, if you guys look at your peak pose summary template, only the summary one for now, we're going to tackle the other one next time. The summary template is pretty much a simple breakdown of everything that is going to be in your sequence, but we're just looking at it from more of an analysis point of view. So the whole first part of it up to pretty much pose modifications, that's essentially what you are going to do and submit to Laura. If you want to send that to me too, let's actually do it that way, because I think then the work's already done. Just have it here because it gives me a little bit of a frame of reference as well to what you've done. Yes, Ani?
Sorry, I did look at the overview, see the assignment, and I'm also, I've got the manual in front of me, but are you referring to a specific page now for the layout?
So your post summary, peak post summary template, that's in your course overview. So you can have that open one place. You don't need to, because I'm going to read out the questions, and I'm just opening up the book on 197 because that's where we've got all of the poses in there.
Okay, thank you.
Get all your right documentation on the right page. Okay, so you're going to go through the pose that you've selected. You're going to do the category, what flexibility is required, what skill, what joint movements it has, what will tire. You guys have covered that a bit. What will fatigue the most that we kind of don't want to overdo in a class, because by the time you get to the peak pose, no one has the energy anymore. And then also rates it out of 5, which is quite interesting because then you at least get to see what kind of, how difficult is this pose that we are going towards. Obviously, as Laura mentioned, you want to choose a pose that's quite challenging. So something intermediate to advanced level, knowing that you will weave your modifications into it. If we are progressively working towards a pose, we naturally have these steps before we get to that peak pose. And it's also really nice because it shows you where you're going. Even though I'm not there yet, I know I'm heading in that direction and this is the path I'm going to take to get there. Doesn't matter if I'm 70, 80, 90% of the way there, I'm going there, all right? Might be today, might be 10 years time. It's cool, we're on that path. So that's going to really help you to know how to modify and also how to make it harder, which is kind of past the peak pose, which we won't get to. But from that, you look at, let's say you've got your pose analysis there. Then I'm going to look at 12 to 16 poses. 16 is even a bit light. So like 12 to 14 poses that are going to help warm up the body for that specific pose. It's going to bring in same kind of flexibility that is required, same kind of strength that is required, and even importantly, the same kind of action that is required. The action is pretty much that skill or kind of that tip that is going to help your students get into the pose. We're going to go through an example now together, which will be a pose that none of you guys will do for the sequence. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of give you all the examples here. I've got that list of 12 to 16. Those poses cannot be something like high mountain, downward dog, child's pose, Tadasana. Those are punchy, super clever, exactly the same joint movement, really detailed poses. Because the more detailed you can be and the more specific you can be, it's going to help you guys so much more in your sequencing. Those things like your vinyasas, your high mountain, your child's pose, that's kind of the fluff and the transitions that you bring in to link everything together, all right? That's even the hardest part because now you've got all of these answers and now you got to go, okay, how do they fit together? How do I get this all in a way that makes sense to me and a way that makes sense to my students, okay? When you guys select your 12 poses, you're going to tell me why did you select this one? Does it have the same flexibility that is required? Does it have the same shoulder movement that's going to help me build strength? Not build strength because we can't build strength in a class, but it brings in the same kind of joint movement. Maybe it's planting an idea. For example, if you were teaching something like let's say even a crow pose, you guys know that's what helped you guys a lot is leaning forward, all right? So even though I'm kind of getting a little bit of a bent arm or a chaturanga arm in my crow pose, in my plank, I might still do the lean forward, all right? Kind of shoulders are both in flexion, so it's a good pose to have in there, but I'm gonna bring lean forward into everything that I do because that is the theme that is like repetition, 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 and then I get to the pose and lean forward, yes, okay. So the skill or the action is what's actually going to be something that you instruct your students that's going to help them get into that pose. All right, that's one example. There's a lot of different things. For example, in your back bends, it's normally lift and lengthen or lean back, lift and go on. All right, sometimes it's push. All right, sometimes it's focus, drishti, especially for your balance. So that is kind of a thread that links all the poses together, that along with the transitions, okay? So you want to tell me why you've chose those specific poses. And when you do that, you can write them all down as you jot down your ideas. Now we need to choose it from easiest to hardest, okay? Because progressively means we're gonna start with the easier variations of the pose and work progressively to the harder variations, okay? How can we, or what are some indicators that tell us if a pose is easier or harder? What are some of the things we'll look out for? I don't know if that was quite worded right. Let's see if we get with that.
Maybe the load or the tension that's placed on each movement.
So the number, so the load that we have. So an example of that would probably be like kneeling, hands and knees versus plank, right? So hands and knees is an easier variation because there's less load, okay? What is something else that might make poses easier or harder?
I would say the number of skills required or the number of components, like different components. So if something requires flexibility, if something requires strength and all at the same time, that would make it difficult. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. I'm trying to think of a pose like a flying pigeon, right? It's a hip opener and an arm balance. So you might bring in some easy variations that just focus on the external rotation, something like a figure 4 without balancing my arms, and then later work on my peak pose of that, because then I'm bringing in all of the combinations. So yes, that's a good one. Yeah, I'm thinking of another 2 more.
Props. Props like blocks.
Like using of props, is that what you said?
Yeah, props. They're like a block or
So
strap
props are
or.
generally- yeah. So props are things like they might give us different sensations. They might help us feel into the pose. They might provide a certain modification of it. So that's something, definitely. The 2 I was thinking of, which are maybe
How much flexibility is needed?
yeah, so some poses require more flexibility than others, and that's something you will weave in. So you guys will feel when you do poses, oh, okay, you know, maybe half splits is an easier variation of pyramid, but also the knees down, there's more contact points that I have with the floor. All right. So what generally makes some poses easier is because there's more support structures. Okay. If I think about let me think, standing splits, I've got my foot and both hands on the floor. If I take one hand off, it makes it harder. If I take both hands off, it takes it harder. So the amount of contact I have with the floor, the same thing being with plank versus one-legged plank, all right? The less contact you have with the floor, the harder it's going to be. The same thing with like certain balances. Balances are harder because I've only got one leg to do it on. Okay. The last one, and what I think is quite a really important one to remember, is the position in which I'm doing it in. All right. So just like we spoke about poses having different orientation, that's kind of the idea that you can do the pose lying on your back. You can do it seated, kneeling, pose, some of them even balanced. All right. So let's think about your crow pose. All right. So crow pose, you can do lying on your back, bring the knees wide, pushing, right? I'm getting that rounding. I might get that core contraction. I'm pushing through my hands. What's really nice about starting from supine is that your students get to feel what the pose feels like, all right? Without bringing into account, like Caroline said, balancing on my hands, which is like, now I've got to deal with fear and falling on my face and my feet are off the ground. Okay, cool, I'm lying on my back. Okay, this feels a bit better. Then I might do it seated and I go, oh, okay, cool. I get the same idea. It's the same joint movements. I'm getting in the same skill required of pushing, squeezing knees in. I can weave that in. Then, so we just did lying, seated. What can I do in kneeling that'll help me for a crow pose? So let's actually think about crow pose. The major joint movements that we have in there are?
Well, kneeling chaturanga.
Yeah, so we can bring in some like little baby chaturangas just to get that same little bend in the arm. We're not going to do too many chaturangas because we don't want our arms to be exhausted by the time we get to an arm balance, but yes. A lot of crow pose is having that hip flexion and that rounding into the back. Like it's quite a compact thing. I've got to squeeze my whole body together, right? So I can bring that knee into my chest in kneeling, one at a time. Knee into chest, push into your hands, bring your knee onto your upper triceps, right? I'm getting one leg doing the same thing at a time, all right? So now I've brought that in. I'm lying, I've done it sitting, I've done it kneeling, all right? Now, when I come to my standing poses, I can incorporate more of a little bit of external rotation, get into those hips a bit more. And then when, you know, after standing comes balancing, then I work into the balancing pose. So sometimes there's not always ways that we can do every single component. I mean, most of the time you can do the poses lying down, but you can take snippets of it and really dissect the pose and see, okay, how can I get my students into that? What's going to help them understand what the pose feels like, even if they can't get to that, all right? Because that's also going to help me know where I'm going before I go there, all right? Have you guys ever done something like, I'm trying to think, what have I done on my back? Like even a warrior 3. Have you done warrior 3 lying on your back? Right, yeah, it feels pretty cool, hey? And I actually like it because you feel super supported. So generally lying on our back is I mean, even though that one is kind of strong on the core, there's a lot of different proprioception aspects happening on there. I get to understand, okay, that's where my arms are, that's where my leg is, that's where my other leg is. Okay, cool, I'm implanting this. So later when I get there, I know how to coordinate my body into this shape. So when you start looking at your poses and you broke them down, you can say, okay, which ones are lying, which ones are seated, which ones are kneeling, standing. Laura and I love sequencing that way. It doesn't mean you always need to start a class lying on your back. Although people love it when you come into class and you say, start lying on your back, and they go, oh, thank goodness, this is going to be an easy class. And then little do they know they're doing like handstand or something ridiculous. So think of ways that you can really start or from the ground level and build up. That's going to help you kind of work progressively, bringing them from easiest to hardest, okay? Then when I've got all those poses and you've told me what you're going to do, just for the summary, you're then going to have in a little bit of cool down poses. So cool down poses are things like neutralizing to a certain extent, or, you know, if you did a back bend, you can do a slightly less of a back bend. You can just do lying flat on your back, you can do legs up against the wall. So you do something that's kind of going to let the body cool down a bit, and then you've got Shavasana. All right. So we're going to get into an example now, but one of the things that I think is quite important to remember, because as you guys are learning to sequence, you're also learning to navigate, how am I going to make sure that this is a 60-minute class, right? Because you don't know how many or how little poses to put in. Bearing in mind, although you've only chosen 12 to 13 poses, you're going to repeat them, right? You guys know you come back to lunge and warrior two like so many different times, all right? So a nice way when you're playing around with your sequence is to record it. In fact, one of my favorite things that I'm going to say to you guys next week, Friday as well, is to voice record yourself. And this is more for the teaching thing, but it's really cool because then you've got an audio of your class and you can even practice your class and see, all right? So it's just a nice way to bring in a different component, or to practice your class, to put your sequence that you've written down out in front of you, practice your class and see, okay, how long does it take me to get there? All right. You guys are still in the process of learning what your pace is. Some of you might teach a little bit faster. Some of you might teach slower. Most of the time, you're going to hold poses for a couple of breaths. Some of you might want to spend some more time there. That's what's going to make your teaching unique. You're totally going to find your own voice, your own way of describing poses, your own pace, because that's going to be something that you'll iron out over time. But when I get those sequences, I want to see that it's most likely going to be about an hour's long. So that's not really applicable for the summary, because the summary is just saying, hey, this is what I'm teaching, this is what I'm teaching. That's more when we come into the detailed peak pose, where you start telling me, how am I going to transition? What are going to be my linking poses and stuff like that? So just to say that 12 to 14 poses, although it doesn't sound like a lot, it's enough to fill up the entire class. All right. Some of those poses, especially those that are done lying down and maybe seated, those kind of weave their way into the warm-up. And then your main peak body sequencing are the things that start usually from a down dog, and that's we do three-legged dog, move through your poses and so on and so forth. And then probably around the, let's say like 35-minute mark, plus minus, that's where you want to get into the peak pose, right? And what's so important about our peak pose is we've worked 35 minutes to get you. You might as well spend some time there. You might as well go over it once or twice and really, really teach it. You guys, I mean, we've said this so many times on the course, how many times you've been in a class and no one teaches you how to do the peak pose. So break them down, empower your students to say, why am I doing this? How am I going to get into this pose? Give them those teaching cues, maybe do it once or twice, and then you start easing it down, and you still saved about 5 or 10 minutes for your Shavasana at the end. Okay. Cool. So I am going to go through, I thought of doing Ekapada Galavasana, running through it as a bit of an example, because I think you guys did that with Laura yesterday and you've kind of touched on it. Unless someone's got a better idea of a pose that they're not going to do their pose analysis on, that we can navigate now. In fact, even though we're kind of giving a couple of examples, and I'm going to use something that's a little bit different from your example that you have in your course overview, is because, you know, the more examples you see, I think it's going to help give you guys a bit of a framework. You guys know and you've experienced some poses in the classes, so that's also giving you some framework as to similar poses that you would incorporate into the class that you do, because it might fall within the same category. All right, so when you guys are open on page 197, you'll see here you've got glorious amounts of pages of poses for you to choose from. So once you understand your category and you say, cool, this is a forward fold, this is a back bend, you can go off into that little section and you can say, cool, that pose, that pose, that pose are the ones that I want to do because they have the same joint movement, they require the same flexibility. It is maybe easy, I mean, preferably easier than your peak pose because you want to use it to work up to the peak pose. And then you can start looking for poses that you think are better suited for that, okay? They kind of linked everything nicely together. I want you to go to page 206 because that's where we got our hip external rotation poses, all right? So if we fly back to what you guys did with Laura yesterday, just go over a very brief Ekapada Galavasana. So flying eagle, what category does this pose fit into?
Balancing.
Yeah, so it's an arm balance, correct? And? What else is happening? We got arm balance in the hand.
External hip rotation.
Yeah, so it's mostly an arm balance, but like we said, arm balance or hip external rotation kind of weaves its way in as its own category sometimes, but most of the time linked to something else, okay? So we know it's an arm balance and we know most of the flexibility that we're going to require is getting into those hips. So let's go into what needs to be warmed up in terms of flexibility. Kind of just gave you the answer.
Your hips.
Cool. And while we at it, let's quickly look at what else is happening throughout the body. Okay, so we got our hip is an external rotation. What is our other leg doing?
Adducting.
Who was speaking there? I heard a little voice, a whisper. Do you guys know what the pose looks like, right? I'm not going to demo it now. We don't know what it looks like. Okay, cool. Well, let's start there. Sorry. I thought you guys were chatting about it yesterday. Okay, so, all right. So this pose has got a figure 4. I'm bringing my hands down onto my floor and it's an arm balance, all right? So I've got my hands down, my palms down. My toes are hooking onto the top end of my tricep. Looking forward, leaning forward, balancing my shin, lifting up that heel, all right? From here, what you do is you lift that leg back behind you. Do we understand this pose now? Okay, so it's like a lot of arm balances in the sense that there's a lot of rounding, okay? Got my front leg in hip flexion and external rotation. My arms are straight in front of me, inner. What shape are my arms in?
Sorry, my network keeps cutting. Can you say the pose again?
So I want you guys to go on to page 208. So kind of the next one that we spoke about. You're just going to flip over the page. All right. I want you to look all the way at the bottom. You see you got 2 people doing crow pose.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Do you guys see crow pose there?
Yes.
Okay. Then the row up from it, you see on the right.
So it's the third one from the right on the page.
I think it's Jason Crandall. This guy over here. Do you see him? Do you see that pose?
Yeah. Hey.
Took so long to reconnect. I don't even know where I lost you guys. Everyone was just frozen for a while. Sorry, Demi, yeah?
Oh, no, I was just showing the pose on the screen.
Okay, so Demi saved the day and she showed you Jason Cran. I think it's got a lot of hair in that picture. So you guys see the pose. Okay, so now we have all an idea what we're doing. Okay, arm balance, external rotation in the front hip. With arm balances, what's happening in the shoulders, or what do we really want to focus on in this pose? Let's think of just more what's required to joint movement first, not so much the skill.
Shoulder protraction.
Kind of round our arms, so we're not really rounding into the upper back. His pose, he's actually
Elbow flexion.
Sorry, say that again.
Elbow flexion.
Elbow flexion. So remember, I think some of you guys said in your anatomy work, in our plank, we're in shoulder flexion, but as soon as we bend our arms back, our chaturanga arms, we're kind of doing a little bit of retraction to the shoulders. We don't go into too much detail, but just think we're warming up chaturanga arms. We might want to bring in maybe 1 or 2 little aspects of chaturanga, not too much arm work that's going to tire it out, because by the time we get there, we want to be fresh and sprightly, okay? So what helps us with, okay, let's run through the rest of the body. All right, so we said, what's happening in the spine?
Curving.
It's curving, yeah. Oh, sorry, I see some hands up. I'm kind of taking whoever's shouting out the idea first, the answer first. What do we think is happening in the spine with most arm balances?
It's tipping forward, so you're balancing out.
That's kind of bringing into action. It's kind of leading you into the action. Yeah, it's a little bit of flexion, right? It's not, it depends. I mean, if you can see, even in crow, all of them have a little bit of rounding into their back, okay? Because we need to bring that knee quite in. We're having our hands there. So there's going to be a bit of rounding into the spine as well. And then what's happening with this back leg? We spoke about the front leg being in hip flexion and external rotation. And the back one?
Extension.
Extension.
It's extending back behind us, okay? Remember extension when the leg's going back behind me. His leg is kind of just straight out, but the idea with that is whenever our leg is extending back, what's working? You guys said it earlier.
Glutes.
Glutes.
So we've kind of navigated. When it comes to the flexibility, it's mostly that front hip that's going to have to, we need to really get in that external rotation, okay? When it comes into the, what muscles will be working, the main,
triceps.
Little bit of triceps, yeah. So we want to get the idea of bringing in those chaturanga arms. We'll see benefits of that. Yeah, exactly. We also have that back leg glute. So that's that's kind of the strength that we need to bring in, a lot of squeezing the glutes, extending leg back behind us. And then this is kind of a tricky one because I would almost find 2 actions that are going to weave its way into the class. What do you guys think? So remember, action is kind of what we want them to do, what's going to lead them and help them get into the pose.
Look forward, lean forward.
So any arm balance, look forward, lean forward, okay? You guys saw when I came into the pose, did you see my back knee was tucked in? Do you guys see that kind of a little bit? You come into the pose from like a figure 4 shape. My bottom knee, not the one that's in external rotation, is kind of hooked in. Now I need to get this leg back behind me. What's going to help me? What do you think is going to help me get it there? What do you guys think?
Extending.
Yeah, extend, but kind of like push your leg back behind you. Okay, so kick, that kicking action that we get in a warrior 3, that's what's really going to get my leg behind me because I need to work those glutes and get it back. Feels like I'm losing a bit of connection. Is it bad, guys? My connection is unstable. How's it? I want to be cutting off. Have you guys got me now?
It's just quite a lag.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's like not even funny weather of sorts. Will you guys just give me a shout when it's too bad? We all feeling good now? Okay.
Yeah.
Otherwise, my video won't work turning it off. Let me just give a moment. Give me a second. Just WhatsApping my fiance to tell him to stop using internet. Okay, cool. So that's pretty much your pose analysis, all right? So if you guys if you've done that already 3 times, now when you get to the part where you've actually got to use your, okay, of course you guys are going to rate it. Sorry, let's just quickly rate it. I think you guys did it yesterday. With regards to flexibility, what do you guys think flexibility is required looking at the front hip? Kind of a lot of So it's interesting because for those who have flexy hips, you're like, oh, it's like a 1. Those who have tight hips are like 5. So it will differ for many of you. It's also going to depend on your students, right? I would say it's quite a lot of flexibility because for me, I feel my bum stretching a lot, especially with the leaning forward coming into that pose. Okay, with regards to the strength. Cool. All right, we got 4 5s. All right, there's a lot of arm strength involved into it, but because you got that leaning action, you're still also resting on the tricep arms. And then with regards to skill, So 5, 5, 5, full marks. Okay, it's a challenging pose, all right? I haven't taught this one lots of times in a class as well, but I think it's actually quite fun because you can progressively work towards it. So you guys have got that whole thing. By the time you get to this point, cool, we have a really good idea of how to get into this pose. Let's see if we can find, let's start with 12 poses that we think bring in either the same joint movement, the same flexibility required, or the same strength or same skill. So they got to be linked, all right? So let's see if we can weave that in. What ideas do you guys have? I mean, just one more thing. For me, what helps it quite easily, sorry, Sasha, is that to start from easiest up, okay? Some of your brains might work like this, and this, and then you're gonna organize it. But let's see if we can do it in one, starting, let's say, from lying down or something easier. Now, I think Catherine might have said it in the video or not, but this pose is quite a fierce pose, right? We've got to get into our hips. We've got to get into that extended leg. We can't spend too much time faffing and lying on our backs, right? Because we got to get a lot done. So the more complex the pose is, we can't always start off like super duper basic. Okay, for some of your students, I think it was Caroline who said no, I watched your chat yesterday. Someone said they were I think it was Sasha saying they were teaching their parents and what kind of pose is going to be a peak pose. I teach a lot of older practitioners here, and our peak pose was one side plank, can be warrior 3, like you guys have seen in your poses. So now we've obviously jumped to the more extreme side because we're kind of testing you out a bit and seeing, can you get there? So with things like warrior 3, you've got some time to spend on your back, get into the hips. With Eka Galavasana, we've got to be like really punchy about it. So that'll also determine where you start and how many like progressions you can bring into that. So let's get, let's shout out some ideas of poses that we can do just for the fun of it. Let's see, starting lying down.
What about that figure 4 when you're lying down?
Cool, we can do figure 4. So right ankle above left knee, hug that knee in. All right, while we're here, because that's kind of one part of the pose, what else can we do lying down? I'm just gonna hop on my mat because you guys can see. All right, started off on a figure 4, all right? I'm holding my back knee. What can I do to bring it more into the pose? What do you think I can kind of weave in here?
And straighten your leg.
You can straighten your bottom leg.
Cool. I can straighten my bottom leg. My front leg's gonna go there with me. So one way is to kind of bring in that shape. All right. If I can bring it so high up, if I was nice and warm and I hooked it there, I can maybe get that shape there. All right. It's not quite looking the same. My toes are working really hard to hook that in there. But do you see how you can kind of weave in that pose already lying back? So I might start off some gently. I might do like a little hip opener. Like, remember your first pose is kind of, hey, welcome to the class. You might take a Baddha Konasana just to do your centering and grounding in. And then I can go, okay, figure 4, all right? Figure 4, from there, reach your arms up, keep that knee bent in. All right, and then I might bring in hooking of that knee. We don't want to start off our first pose with, cool, you're doing this pose upside down, break it down. Just the figure 4, just the reaching, maybe do a little crunch, okay? You don't always have to do all the lying down, all the seated, all the kneeling. Remember, I think it's some of you guys who are doing the pistol squat. You can start off lying and come back to lying later as long as it makes sense, all right? As long as we're not doing like stand up, okay, sit down, stand up, sit down. But yes, we did say figure 4, and figure 4 is pretty much a variation of lying down on your back. Okay, what other poses could we weave in there?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I just didn't understand what you said when you said we start. I didn't get that. You said we start lying down. Is there a reason why, or I just don't know.
You don't have to start lying down. So not at all. Remember in the beginning I said, you can do poses in different orientations. So as you would have seen in some of Laura's classes, sometimes starting lying down helps us to tap into easier variations of the pose, all right? So it's a kind of the same way you might do crow or something like that. These are just ideas to give you. You might say, I don't want to start lying down. I'm going to start seated and I'm going to work from here. Chances are with your classes, you will start either seated or lying down. Sometimes a child's pose, which it's not my favorite way of starting in because some students like child's pose is even a lot for them. But you'll start in a pose that is generally a little bit more accessible to most. I've even been to some classes where like, hey, start in a down dog or start standing. And you're like, whoa, this is so interesting, all right? So there's no rules as such. but this is just to give you guys ideas of different poses. You can start wherever you want.
But you said we should break it down in
Yeah, so what I was going to say is that this pose has external rotation into it. So I might come into my back. My first pose can be a butterfly pose, just normal butterfly. All right. I'm getting that external rotation. I can do some breath work. All right. Then I might do figure 4 on each side. Figure 4 is bringing in the external rotation of that leg. You guys see that? Do you guys want me to practice it while I'm talking? No, are we fine? Okay. I'm going to do figure 4. So I can do my first figure 4 just holding like this. All right. Getting into that stretch, feeling it, feel it. Okay, cool. Now let's add on. Now extend your arms forward. This is the pose we're working towards today. Can you see if you can push and do a little bit of a crunch? Maybe hook your toes back, cool, come back down, release. Let's do the other side. So all I'm doing is I'm like, while we're in a figure 4, let's quickly give them a snippet of what they're going to feel later on, bringing in that action. All right. Because they're going to need a little bit of a push. The leaning in will come in other ways. So it's pretty much like saying the figure 4 and then doing that pose on your back. It's just another way of doing it. That makes sense. Cool. All right. So let's kind of move on from that because we'll be there forever. What other poses can we bring in? Let's just maybe say from there, we do figure 4, we rock up and down the spine, we come up into a seated position. What can we do here?
I forget what it's called, but we did it this morning where you have one leg extended out in front of you and your another leg into your almost like hip groin area in the thigh, and kind of do a forward fold over that too, because I know it's something I struggle with, to get the hips moving in that way. And then maybe from there you could do something like a tree pose to really get that external rotation going in each leg.
Cool. So the tree pose, you mean in standing, right?
Yeah, but from that seated, I feel like it could flow into standing.
You're really starting to think progressively. So yeah, we could roll up and down here. You could do a quick little Janu Sirsasana just to get open into the hips. You're not spending too much time here because we also want to get the flow going. But yeah, we could bring in something like that. We could just bring a nice seated forward fold just to get into the hips, a little side roll. Depends how much time you spent on your back, because seated and lying down kind of weave its way into the warm-up section. But yeah, we can bring in something a bit seated just to kind of plant the seed. Roll over the ankles, come into hands and knees. This is a really nice point here when we're on hands and knees to bring in a whole lot of different concepts. So let's bring in hands and knees. Where can we go to from here? What can we weave in?
Cat cow with maybe like a bit of focus on the rounding in your cat.
Yeah. So we got cat and cow. Can we bring the action into here?
Leaning forward.
Yeah, so we can do a little bit of leaning forward, maybe a small little baby chaturanga, get that into the arms. And then because we don't really need to go into an up dog or a back bend, from our little chaturanga, we can just bring in that pushing into it, all right? So that our theme of even pushing into the floor is already weaving its way in there, okay? So even though our traditional sun salutations have a chaturanga up dog, it doesn't have to be that way every time. If you wanted to, you could, but yeah, so we've got a little bit of cat cow in there. Now what's happening with our back leg in our peak pose? Cool, it's extending back behind us. While we're on all fours, maybe we can do something here.
We do a knee to nose and then extend it out.
Knee to nose, yeah. So remember from that knee that's in that, it's kind of in a bent position. So I really need to squeeze that leg back behind me. So bring that knee into my chest and then shoot that leg back, kick the heel back behind you. And then exhale round, bring your knee into your nose, exhale, same back behind it. So start on speed, that's bringing in the same strength, that's required in the back leg. Okay, cool. What else can we do in all fours? Maybe get in some hip external rotation. Do we think we can get in some there?
Yeah, you could do like downward dog, one three-legged dog, but on your hands and knees, and really open it up to the side. So
you could go straight to downward facing dog. So now down dog, remember, think that we've still got, if we have a three-legged down dog, it's very similar to our kneeling position. So if we wanted to come from here, we could go great. Three-legged down dog can be one of your poses that you use. Okay, not down dog, because three-legged down dog has specific properties of that leg up behind us. And even in 3-legged down dog, we could still bring the knee to the nose, maybe not like 10 times because my arms might hurt a bit. Okay. Let's move into a few standing poses. What do we think we could weave in there? So what kind of poses are we looking at? What general joint movement are we looking for in our standing poses?
Hip extension and, well, I suppose also a bit of flexion. So maybe like a warrior 2 or something like that.
Okay. What was happening on the front leg of our thing? Of our pose, our peak pose?
Rotation, hip rotation.
External rotation. So what poses in standing do we get external rotation?
Tree pose?
Sorry, there were so many there, you guys. Beautiful chorus at the same time.
Tree pose.
Tree pose, which is not only standing, it's more of a balance, right? But yes, we could bring it in. Okay. What else have we got?
Goddess.
Goddess, good. Yeah, Demi? Sasha did say warrior 2, so I'm going to put that in there. Warrior 2 is a good one.
Trikonasana.
You can do it at Trikonasana as a part of a flow. It's got that external rotation. So although it's a straight leg, like you might want to bring it into the flow as well. It's not as punchy as one of the others, but yeah, it's not wrong. So that's fine. We're still getting that movement into the hip. And even for the leg back behind us, like it's good, just general mobility to get in there. What else can we do?
Aeroplane.
Aeroplane, yeah. So specifically for?
The glutes, the back leg, the leg extension.
Yeah, airplane's a really good one. I like that one too. And even if you start kind of like if I did whatever pose and I was here and I bring a bend into my knee, I lift it up and then I kick. Let's say, sorry, you can do the same thing in a warrior 3, but to get kind of this motion, because that's what I really want from them. You want that kick. So I can do that in a warrior 3, I can do it kneeling, I can do it in a standing split, and I can do it in a warrior 3. Did I say one thing twice there? But you see what I mean? So that's a good one. I like that one, Caroline. You can weave that in a lot of times. Cool. What else have we got there, Demi? There's one really cool one. Oh, it's not standing. Let's quickly go there. So standing, we've got warrior 2, we've got goddess. Yeah. Okay, cool. Can we think of maybe one more standing that kind of helps?
Well, what I was going to say is Skandasana kind of is standing, but you're getting that lean as well, and you're getting the external rotation, and you're getting extension to some point.
Kind of nice one. I like Skandasana because it's all general. I mean, most of the time you guys have done it, you've done Skandasana one side, then to the other, then back to the lunge. So for me, that just feels good for my hips all around. It's like, it just feels good. So I kind of like the Skandasana. I think that one will work quite nice. So from our Skandasana, if we just had to bring the flow, we would bring 3-legged down dog, maybe once bring the knee into the chest, really round, inhale, bring your leg back, step to the top of the mat, warrior 2. Might do an extended side angle just to get a little bit of that hip flexion leaning, try to get that elbow high up onto, or your hand to the inside of the knee, not only resting on the elbow, but get really nice into that extended side angle. You can do a little bit of a triangle there. Then you can do Skandasana to the one side, Skandasana to the other side, come back to a lunge. And then from here, you might not only go down a dog, you might come up into a standing split and then do that little bum lift thing on the back. All right, so we get a lot of that. Cool. What can we do that is more of a balancing that can also bring in a little bit of preparation? I actually want to add in there, while we're in external rotation, sorry, Caroline, I'll come to you now. Think of other poses that we've also got, like while we're doing Skandasana, you can do things like Malasana squat, external rotation, hands in front of me. You could even do like a crow pose as a prep pose for something like Ekapada Galavasana. If you're teaching a really intermediate class, you might do Bakasana, okay, cool, downward facing dog, and just do one in the class just to get that leaning forward, all right? I might bring that leaning forward into something like my standing splits. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. I just kind of want to weave that in there that you can bring that in, but obviously it depends on the class you're teaching and how adventurous they are. All right, what other pose could we do in standing? So we mentioned there that we've got a tree pose. What else can we do? That's quite a good one. Helene. Oh, sorry. I was going to come to Caroline first. Forgot. Caroline and then Helene.
No, Helene, you go, and then I'll go after Helene.
Helene.
Caroline, I think you and I probably want to say the same thing. I want to say Utkatasana, where you put your ankle on your knee.
Figure
and
four.
then sort of
Yes.
figure four.
I would weave in figure four a lot, guys, just because that is your entry point into the pose. So remember when we spoke about that pose where we did warrior 3 coming up, standing splits, or use your warrior 3 to get you, bring that leg around, sit down into your chair pose with your figure 4, take that leg back, do a little flow, come back to it again, sink down maybe a little bit lower, try to get your hands on the floor, come back, do the rest of your pose, and then use it as an entry point. So that because that's your entry into the pose, by the time you spend some time there, you're like, cool, feels good, right? So that's kind of a nice thing to play around with. And also for students that are, let's say if we think about progressions, a lot of the things is like you can't get your hands down to the floor yet, right? So you might have your hands up on blocks. So you might want to navigate what that feels like to have your hands on blocks before I'm balancing on my hands. So leaning forward, put my hands on the blocks, then getting that really grip, and then start to lean forward, get used to that. And then students might still work for that. Some might lean forward and balance. Some might just be working on the flexibility. There you've got that kind of progressions of how we are working into the pose. Okay, so I think there we listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We got 12 poses, right? So that's kind of the process you guys are going to go through. And as you are starting to think of these poses, start laying down patterns of how you will get them into the poses, all right? So kind of like Demi said earlier, if I'm in Baddha Konasana and then tree pose, it's not really an easy way to get there, but can easily get to a tree pose from standing, from chair, from warrior 3. So try to think of ways in which they can lead into each other, because that's going to be for the next week's homework. That's where you're going to have to link them together. And if it doesn't make sense, it's just going to be complicated for your students. So this is kind of where we get all that flow coming in. All right, any questions at this point with regards to the sequencing?
Sorry, I disappeared in the beginning, so I'm not sure. I know all the dates and that are in the overview. Is there anything specific we need to do before those dates for anything here?
No, so it's just your second anatomy homework is due on the 20th, which is this week Friday. I will see you guys that evening. So if some of you guys sent it earlier, if you sent it earlier, that's great, because it means I could mark it all on Friday for you, but obviously in your own time. So that's going to weave in a little bit of what we've been speaking about already in the anatomy. Then the first step is actually, you're just going to choose your pose. So go ahead, when you choose your 3 pose analysis poses and you chat to Laura about it, she'll be like, that's too easy, that's too difficult. So I don't think she'll say it's too difficult. She'll probably tell you to make it harder. But finding a pose and then send those through to her. When she says all 3 of those are fine, you will choose one to send through to me. Okay, so the date of choosing your poses is actually the 23rd, which is next week Sunday, but your actual pose summary is only due like the week after that. So in this time, I'm only seeing you guys for teaching skills, just like you'll check your poses with Laura, you can say to me, Taryn, I'm thinking of doing a wheel pose or something, or maybe you're thinking of doing one-legged wheel because you want to spice it up a bit. I'm kind of thinking, okay, it's a back bend, so I'm thinking I might want to do some pose with a lot of shoulder flexion, get some hamstring for the leg. It's a back bend also. Am I kind of on the right track? Or I'm a bit confused. Do you think this pose would fit or something like that? Because I'm only seeing you guys in 2 weeks' time. If a question comes up and you want to start planting that seed, just send us a WhatsApp or ask about it, because it's nice to kind of refine those things as you go along. And also to say, is this something that could be a peak pose? Is this something that couldn't, right? So there's not something that can't be, we're not going to do warrior 2 as a peak pose, but you can also do like a whole lot of different things. If you're working towards crow, like I think Laura said yesterday, could do side crow. You can do side crow with the scissor legs. There's like, man, yoga is so infinite, guys. There's so many cool ideas. And the book's got a lot of options, but also think about your practice and things that you like. Do you resonate more with back bends, with arm balances? Even if you do resonate with more than one, you might want to do the other one just to kind of challenge yourself a bit.
Okay.
that's what I come to now. That's what I would encourage for this, is to pick something that you think kind of challenges you a bit, because if you can pick something quite challenging now, it'll be easier for you when you go out there to sequence. Okay, even those ones that have like this one that's got a lot of components, right? Someone was going to ask, was it no, it was Caroline. Hey.
Just a question on the sequencing. We don't have to do, I mean, it makes sense though, but just a general question. Whether we have to do poses on the back, seated, hands and knees, and standing. Would we maybe be able to do a full class on the floor, or just for?
Yeah, there's, like I said, there's no right way or wrong way to do it. I think that if you can give yourself more room with different poses to work with, it might help you later on. But that being said, you can easily just start your class in seated, just do Sukhasana as a little bit of a grounding, and then go straight into your hands and knees and straight into down dog. I've done many classes where I'm sitting, cat cow, cool, down dog, let's start with the flow. Also completely fine, completely fine. It also depends on the pose that you're doing, right? So that's, you don't have to follow all of those steps. It's just there as an idea for you, because it gets us thinking a little bit more creatively, and it helps challenge, and you guys have to think out the box a bit. But if it doesn't work, then that's completely fine. You can also do your whole class standing. I'm thinking as an example, like if you wanted to do handstand, you could start straight from a down dog split, lunge, half splits, whatever the case may be. You don't have to do anything lying on your back, because you want to get into that hamstring and skill work super quickly. So for those poses that you need to get a lot done, you don't always have to faff with lying down and feeling the pose or whatever the case may be. But there's an option. It's kind of a hard one, because I'm like, you can do it, you also can't, that's fine. You guys are all going to go out there and teach whatever you want in your own way, and these are just tools to show you how to do it in different ways, and then you're going to choose the way that works for you, which is great. Okay. The cool thing is about peak pose sequencing is it's really fun. So although we have the traditional yoga poses, as you guys have seen in your class with Laura, like little curtsy squats and pivots and these kind of variations, and I'm doing a lunge with Gomukhasana arms, or I'm doing a warrior 2 with a bind behind my back, that's completely allowed. We are giving you guys a lot of freedom, which I think is really amazing, to learn about how the body moves in different ways and how you can incorporate that with different shapes. So I think kind of tapping into that creativity is going to make it really fun for you guys. And I think it was Catherine who said on one of the other trainings is that sometimes people come from a dance background or something else, and although we do want to stick to the traditions of yoga poses, there's a lot of different moves or movements that can really facilitate and support our yoga practice. We know that so many cool transitions, like your Skandasana, and then suddenly you're in a pose and the teacher's like squirrel, you're like, I don't know what squirrel is, but it helped me got somewhere, and that's cool. That's what's going to weave in with the transitions as well. So you're kind of getting that creativity going. So I think it's so much fun, guys. I'm like kind of dying to make a sequence with you guys, but it really is. And I'll tell you this, the best sequences I ever made were in my 200-hour teacher training. And I wish I had kept them. I think I have 1 or 2 on my laptop, but I promise you now, the sequences you make now are so brilliant because you're in that like study learning mode. So you guys must keep your sequences, and when when we mark them, you guys can share them with each other and have like a really good, kind of resource of classes to teach when you go out there. Cool. Demi?
So I just want to clarify. So with Laura, we're going to be choosing 3, and she's going to give us one of those 3 to do as an analysis.
You're going to do 3 analyses for her.
Oh, so we're going to do all 3 that we pick, and then out of one of those, we're going to do one sequence flow for you.
You guys choose it and send it to me, and I might say cool, I might say maybe add on, maybe do something else into it, whatever the case may be. But yeah, so I mean, obviously you're going to do Laura's work first because the sequencing is building onto the pose analysis work. Pose analysis work is on from the analysis. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Cool. That being said, also just adding on what I said to the last one, although we are making it creative and fun and explorative, and you guys can tap into that, doesn't always mean it needs to be super complicated, all right? Especially, these are the good thing about writing sequences is we can kind of go mad. We can be like, and then I'm going to do this and this and this and this. But then the reality of it is as complicated as you make it. You need to teach that in a class. I remember being in a class once and the teacher was teaching it, and it was the first time teaching a circular flow. And she got so confused, and she actually apologized afterwards. I didn't even notice she did anything wrong because you are so confused yourself. You turning all around on your mat. But she just said she couldn't remember where she was some of the time. So those are complicated. And the sequences that you guys teach for your teaching allocations, which I will send you guys on Tuesday, just when we kind of navigate over this week, I'm going to send you a list of which sequence you'll be teaching for your teaching prac. These are tricky sequences, right? They're really quite complex, but what's nice about them is they're super creative and they're super specific. And so that's great. But they don't always have to be as complicated as that. You guys are going to teach in a way that works for you and makes sense for you. Okay. Are we feeling excited, guys? Sweet. Okay. So last round, just to confirm that on Tuesday, I'm going to email you your teaching pose allocations. That's just going to say you are teaching this sequence, you're teaching this sequence. You guys are either going to get a forward bend, an arm balance, or a back bend. They've all been randomly allocated. Don't worry too much about it. On Friday, we're going to chat about that. Right. Friday is also the day you send me the anatomy work. Any questions before then, you can WhatsApp me. And with that being said, that was the quickest. Yes, sorry, question.
So this teaching prac that you're sending on Tuesday, it's due later on after all the analysis and the sequencing stuff, right?
Yeah, so these are kind of going to run your summary and your analysis are kind of going to be the next things that you guys are going to do. Your teaching practical is going to be you learning a sequence to physically teach it, to stand in front of your friend, partner, housemate, or whatever, and teach them and send me a video. So that's going to come later in the course, but don't worry about it until Friday because we're going to chat a bit about how you're going to navigate that video and how that's going to go about. But later on, you'll see once we do the summary, because you see for sequencing, there's the summary template and then there's the full sequencing, all right? The first one is just going to be you guys sending this to me and I'm going to say, yes, your poses are right. Yes, you've got an idea. I can see you get what's going. Go ahead. You can carry on to the full sequencing where you start linking and transitioning together and actually making it a class. But we've split it into two so that you kind of know you're on the right track and we can say, take this one out or no, you know, so that you don't do the whole thing and then we need to start all over again. But the teaching skill will be, that's a whole thing. We give you a sequence and you teach that. So it's a lot of, it's a lot of different things, but just stay on top of it with the due dates. There's usually like one thing due every week, but it's fine. We have the best faith in you guys. I was really impressed with a lot of the anatomy work. I can see that you guys are really getting the concepts. And for those who are a little bit confused, it was just one or two things you needed to iron out. And when you responded back to me, said, cool, yeah, I got it. That's great. So I'm stoked with that. Cool. All right, guys, have a wonderful evening. If you like, after marking all your stuff on Friday, I swear I like dreamt about anatomy on Friday night. So I hope you guys dream about peak post sequencing. If you do, write it down because we come up with good ideas in our dreams. And then have a wonderful week, guys. I'll see you next week, Friday.
Bye, Taryn. Thank you.
Bye, Taryn. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thanks.